This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, from Philadelphia to Erie and from Scranton to Pittsburgh. It's Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenawalt, Senior Fellow, the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. I'm joined by my co-host, Maura Donnelly. Hi, Maura.
Hello, Charlie.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Okay.
Spring, finally.
Yes,
nice.
Finally.
Yes.
With spring, we are always looking for fresh beginnings. With fresh beginnings, we have many people in the Commonwealth who are looking for jobs. And if I'm looking for a job, I would want to talk to our guest today.
I would too. Well, I used to work there, so.
So we are fortunate enough to have as our guest today Gene Barr, the President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. Gene, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
It's so nice to have you. I share with my students this story that makes your job so difficult, and you have been so good at just really been tough at trying to change things, and that is that the United States has the highest corporate taxes in the world, and of all the states that have the highest corporate tax, Pennsylvania does. So Pennsylvania is the worst place in the world to start a business. It makes it very difficult, and yet you have been leading the charge to make things better and to remove that distinction from the Commonwealth. So wondering if you could.
How's it going?
We've been trying. We've been trying. And let's dig into that for a minute, because there's a lot there, Charlie, in what you said. First off, for corporations, yes, we have a very restrictive corporate tax climate, as you know. 9.99 corporate net income tax rate, the highest effective in the United States. Combine that with the U.S. rate, which is the highest in the world. We'll wait and see what might happen in Washington over the next upcoming months in terms of changing that. For businesses that are starting up, though, smaller businesses, the rate's not too bad. It's 3.07. And the one thing that we do like to talk about, because it's easy to fall into this, gee, Pennsylvania is so bad, we've got a lot of real positives we should be able to capitalize on. We've got some of the best educational institutions in the world in this Commonwealth. We do have, despite the complaints about potholes that we regularly hear because of where we're situated on that freeze-thaw line, we do have a pretty good system of transportation, be it highways, roads, bridges, mass transit, air, water, all of that we have. We have got, I think, a really good workforce in terms of being motivated and a lot of that training, although training and getting people into the right jobs is one of our biggest concerns and one of our biggest priorities right now. And the last one is this great new resource that's developed in Pennsylvania in recent years, which is natural gas, which has the real ability to fuel, no pun intended, this Commonwealth for years in terms of job creation, not related to just simply taking that resource out of the ground. But if we do this right in terms of tax structure, in terms of building the infrastructure, in terms of finding those markets, Pennsylvania can be set as a leader for decades.
So it's a lot of trickle down in the energy. It's, as you said, it's not just the jobs at the
Correct.
Sites. It can affect every other industry in Pennsylvania and help it grow.
Absolutely.
Cost savings.
Cost savings, exactly, for those that are energy-intensive businesses. But the decision by Shell to put $3 to $4 billion investment out in Southwest PA is massive because of the industries that can grow up around that will utilize that stream, that feedstock from the ethane cracker is tremendous. And if we can do that again and do that right, the chances of getting many more billions of dollars increase.
Well, so it's bringing in. I have family out there, so it's bringing in the jobs. It's building new homes. It's a boom out there. All kinds of new stores, outlets and stores and things. So it can mushroom in various sections of the state.
And it's taking that feedstock and building so many and making so many different products that are utilized in that plastics industry from the ethane. It's tremendous, and again, it needs to be done properly, it needs to be done right. And when we say right, it means protective of human health and the environment, encouraging the growth, bringing in people, making sure we have the people who can fill those jobs, and to be honest, building that facility is quite honestly the first job, and making sure we have tradespeople who can come in and do that is tremendously important.
Well, that's something that some of the universities around the Commonwealth, for example, Mansfield, is changing its curriculum to try to accommodate the industry, Gene. Wondered if you had any other news about developments in that area.
A lot of them have. A lot of them have changed. That is, the four-year schools have made some modifications in terms of churning that out. A lot of the schools have, for example, Penn College in Williamsport has turned to, which is part of the Penn State system, has turned to 1- and 2-year programs. What's becoming abundantly clear in our society is that a high school diploma is no longer sufficient. You need to have something that says, I'm certified in this, whether it's a 1- or a 2-year, 1-year certification, 2-year degree, 4-year degree, beyond 4, obviously, if you want to go into one of the professional careers, you need that. But it's clear that we need something. And we've got a lot of people who don't have anything beyond those diplomas. So we have taken it upon our organization to begin to let people know that there are many options beyond 4 years. For a long time we've told people, if you don't go to 4-year school and don't get your bachelor's degree, you're never going to make it. We know that's not true. For some people, that is what they need in order to get into the career that they want. But for many others, there are great careers in what you've talked about, that is being able to go out after 1 or 2 years and be able to have a family-sustaining career.
Well, and sometimes you can go and get that bachelor's degree, and it still isn't the skill set that you need to be in these new booming industries.
Exactly,
So,
and that's a problem.
Yeah.
And sometimes people go back for more, but it's giving parents, teachers, and students, giving them the information they need to make that decision, that maybe going to 4 years isn't necessary, but at least knowing that there are options out there. And one of the things that we have done a great job in this country over the years has been denigrating the trades, and we need to stop that. If you go overseas, you go to a Germany, a tradesperson who works in the BMW plant, that is a coveted job. Tradespeople are coveted in many other places, and we need to get to that position so that we can give people that understanding that these are good careers.
Does the Chamber have a program where you work with vocational technical schools around the Commonwealth? This is certainly something that there's been a mindset, and it's not just in Pennsylvania, it's across the country,
everywhere,
as you say, Gene, where people denigrate vocational technical education, but yet we need world-class mechanics, machinists, carpenters, and plumbers, and so forth.
As parents, many of us are guilty of it. Probably most of us are guilty of it. I mean, I certainly was, telling your kids you have to do this. So what we've done is we've put on a number of programs. We've pulled together a lot of different elements and interests to talk about this, from the trade schools to the 4-year schools to high school guidance counselors in terms of sitting and talking. We've also partnered with the Mike Rowe Foundation. Mike Rowe, the TV personality. We had Mike Rowe back last spring. Yeah. And so we are the only state chamber that it now has a formal affiliation with the Mike Rowe Foundation to create scholarships for, I shouldn't say kids, because we actually 2 weeks ago were down at a Hiring Our Heroes event we do with the U.S. Chamber, returning servicemen and women who are looking for jobs back in, letting them know that we have scholarships available through our organization and his organization that will allow them to go to develop the skills they need to work in those trades. I can't think of a more important group to try and bring back into this society than our returning service people.
Oh, that's phenomenal. Wow. So we've talked about a lot of the positives, but I know there's still some challenges.
Sure.
So let's talk a little bit about the budget. It's budget season.
Yeah, it's budget season, yeah.
And, depending on who you talk to, there are tax increases, there aren't tax increases. Mm-hmm. But it looks like there's a pretty good list of tax increases on business. You want to talk a little bit about
There is a big one. And look, to his credit, the governor, there's a roughly $3 billion gap in terms of what we need and what we have going into next year's budget. And the governor has chosen about $2 billion of that through greater efficiencies in state government, mergers, consolidations, et cetera, and that's generating a lot of discussion, certainly in the legislature and in the media. But unfortunately, part of his proposal also included $1 billion in new and increased taxes, and all of them fell on the business community. And the problem when you put them on the business community is that it tends to be a drag on our competitiveness. Charlie, you noted at the beginning the fact that we're 9.99 corporate net income tax rate. The governor's proposed some things, unfortunately, that in our view will make Pennsylvania even less competitive in terms of things like combined reporting, et cetera, as well as some other taxes across the board that in our view would be a drag. So we're fighting those. And the other thing I think that's crucial is that we've gotten into this position. If you had to pick one item, one issue that's brought us here, it's our pension issue. We're now spending more than 10% of our general fund budget on pensions for existing employees. That has to change. And unfortunately, because we're so far behind, it can't change for a while, but we've got to make those changes that will at least start bringing us into more fiscal stability.
Well, we talk to a lot of different people, and every time a discussion about the budget comes up, pensions is tied to it, unless you're the governor. There's been no mention of pensions. So how do you get that back on the radar?
I think what there was a lot of discussion about the fact the governor did not mention that as part of it. I think part of it is that, to a certain degree, I'd agree with them. We'd like to take this out of the budget, that is, solve it before we get into that crunch time in June. As you know, it's sometimes not the best time to figure out sanely what we need to do from public policy. So let's take it outside that heated exchange of the budget discussion and try and fix it. So I think there's a drive to try and fix it before we get into that crunch time towards the end of June. So something is
happening on it.
There's a lot of discussions on it.
Okay, that's good. That's good news.
It is good news.
Yeah.
It is good news.
That would be very helpful.
Yes.
Well, other good news for the business community was not so long ago, the Pennsylvania Business Council and the Chamber merged.
We did.
And this should result in increased efficiencies. And just wondering if you could bring us up to date on how the merger is
Things are going well, actually. I think we're very pleased with it. We've had a couple of policy roundtable meetings. The old policy roundtable, the Business Council, now functions as the primary policy-making body for the Pennsylvania Chamber. That's going very well. As you note, I think we've developed greater efficiencies. We've been able to better target the business community resources, speak with more of a voice. Although, I will say that I think here in Pennsylvania, there are a number of statewide business groups. I think the cooperation among those groups has been really, really positive over the years, much better than people might think. But I think bringing that in and making two into one really does help to channel the resources and channel that voice even more than it has been.
And I know there's another big issue that crops up every few years, and that's civil justice reform. And all the business groups are coming together on that again.
Exactly.
You want to give
Not
that
just
a
the
plug?
business groups, but doctors, hospitals, et cetera, the insurance side, realizing that Pennsylvania has so much to do to fix our civil justice climate, to make it more fair and equitable across the board, to make it more conducive for job creation. And so Kurt Schroeder, a former state representative, has been brought on to run that group. And again, it's a coordinated effort of business, doctors, hospitals, et cetera, because there's a recognition that so much more does need to be done, and we're going to make that attempt.
You're a busy man.
It's a little busy
You're
these days. It's a little busy these days.
In the last 30 seconds, Gene, are we going to have a budget on time, and is it going to be balanced?
I've been very surprised at how optimistic leaders have been about this. When you look at $3 billion, I would have thought there would have been a lot of hand-wringing and talking about getting out of here in September, et cetera. So I've been more optimistic. I've heard more optimism than I might otherwise think. Second, it always has to be balanced because it's constitutionally required, although you could argue it's also constitutionally required to be done by the end of June, which we don't often hit. For some strange reason, I think we will. I think it will be done by the end of June.
Will business come out unscathed?
There's a lot of ways to define unscathed, and not making any improvements in our climate, I would argue, continues to be a problem because we're so far behind other states.
Okay.
Thank you, Gene, very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate you being here, and stay tuned for the next segment of Behind the Headlines. We'll be right back.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Hi, welcome back to Behind the Headlines. Maura and I in this segment are joined by Rick Rodgers. Rick, you are the president of Rodgers and Associates out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Can you tell us, what does Rodgers and Associates do?
Thank you for having me back. We're a wealth management firm, so we primarily work with individuals, and we become their chief financial officer, helping them make smart decisions about money, anything that has to do with money, investments, taxes, estate planning, should I buy a car or rent a car? So just working with individuals.
I need to talk to you.
Yes.
Can you be unwealthy and still talk to you?
Well, we do have a minimum,
Okay.
and so there's a minimum account size that we work with. But we're certainly happy to help people make smart decisions and do whatever.
I think your new book is going to be great. Don't Retire Broke, and helping the average person really be successful in retirement. So we're really excited to talk about that today.
This book is perfectly timed for people in my generation, the boomers, who are starting to think about retirement, and some of us to enter into it. So this would be a godsend for so many boomers.
Yeah, and I think it takes a different perspective of retirement, because mostly when people are thinking about retirement or planning for retirement, they're trying to accumulate a certain amount of money. So I need X amount of money. There was a famous book that came out about the number, that you have to get to this number and then you can be retired. Well, that certainly is part of it. So how much that you accumulate is part of it. How much you're going to spend is certainly another part of the equation. This book focuses on the after-tax aspects of it. So that number doesn't need to be as big if it's not going to be, the whole thing's going to be subject to tax. So how do we do it tax efficiently so that we don't have to save as much, because when we're actually are retired, that we're going to be in a lower tax bracket?
Well, so what's the most important thing that people should do to avoid retiring broke? What's the number one thing?
I don't think we have enough time to go through all of it. But the number one thing, I actually get that asked that a lot, and I think probably the most important thing is to start early. So get time on your side, start thinking about it. It's difficult for people who are in their 20s or 30s to think about retirement, because the perception is that retirement is for old people, or that I've got plenty of time to do that and get around to it. And the sad part of that is that if you wait until you're 50, you don't have much time for your money to compound, so there's a lot more pressure on actually saving. So getting started early, and if it helps those 20 and 30 somethings, think of it as financial independence, not think of it as retirement. So I want to get financially independent, because we can all get excited about being financially independent. I want to be financially independent as soon as possible. And to get there, we start early, and we do it consistently.
Could it mean retiring a little bit earlier if you start early enough, or do you still have to play by those rules?
Well, it could be retiring earlier, and this book will certainly help with that, because there's penalties for taking money out of retirement accounts too soon. And so if your objective is to be able to be financially independent at 50, we can't have everything put into a 401k or an IRA and then be restricted on how we take the money out, or be penalized for taking it out.
Okay.
Well, in the last couple of years, the IRS has had more than their share of press attention. Rick, does the IRS really have a bullseye on our retirement assets?
Oh, I think they absolutely do. You think about how much money is in retirement accounts, but it's trillions. There's trillions of dollars that is stuffed away in retirement accounts, and so those are all untaxed assets. So how can we get at, from the IRS perspective, how do we get at that money sooner, or penalize? I know that former President Obama had several ideas about how to put a cap on how much money could be saved in there and penalize you if you saved more than that. So there's always thoughts about how to get at this money and get at it sooner.
And is this book going to help people help to avoid some of that then?
Well, it is, and we think of, whenever we think of investments, you always think of diversification. Like what is the number one rule for investing? You need to diversify. You don't put all your money in one stock, you don't put it all in stocks, bonds, and so forth, you diversify. The same applies to planning for retirement. We need to diversify. We want money saved in 401ks and IRAs, but that's all going to be taxed when it comes out. We want money saved after tax, because we've already paid tax on that, and that's easily accessible. There's no penalties for getting to it. And we want money saved tax-free in Roth IRAs. And if we diversify over all three of those, no matter what happens with the tax code in the future, we can determine what our tax bracket is by how much we take from each one of the accounts. Taking more from the Roth to minimize taxes, taking more from the 401k if we happen to be in a low tax year. So it really covers your bases, and it's I think, the only way that we should prepare for an uncertain tax future.
Well, Rick, if you're just looking at this year, what would be the most important thing to do this year to prepare for retirement?
If you're going to retire, so again, that kind of depends, but let me walk you through my thought process. So if I'm going to retire next year, the most important thing you should do this year is live on your budget. So whatever you've determined that is going to be my spending when I retire next year, whatever that dollar amount is, let's live on it this year. Because if you find you can't live on that budget this year, then there's no sense in retiring next year.
I have friends who are doing that. That really is great advice, because it sort of prepares you in advance for what life is going to be like at
Right.
that point. So when I years ago heard about the three-legged stool for retirement, and I don't remember what it is, but can you tell? There's a new three-legged stool.
Right.
So can you tell us what the old three-legged stool is for preparing for retirement, and now what the new one should be?
Well, back in the 70s, it was theorized.
Is that when no wonder I don't remember.
Well, it was theorized because in the 70s is when you had ERISA, which protected pensions, and pensions was one leg of the old stool. COLAs were added to Social Security. Before that, it had to be voted on to have an increase, and I think it was 74 or something like that they put automatic increases in it, and then personal savings. So those were your original three legs. Well, pensions are, unless you work for the public sector, they're pretty much gone, and they're going to have to be modified significantly for those that are around to stay around. Social Security is wobbly, and that's going to have to be adjusted if that's going to be sustainable. And so now we're back to a new three legs, which is your tax-deferred accounts, your 401k and IRAs, your tax-free account, your Roth and Roth 401k, and your after-tax account. And so that's the new three legs that we should be building in order to have a secure retirement.
Okay,
Well,
very,
what
very
makes
interesting.
this new three-legged stool so efficient in today's economy?
Well, I think two things. One, it's not dependent on somebody else, it's dependent on you. So you build these three legs, so nobody, Social Security could be changed by future legislations, pensions could be modified. Even if they can't be modified, the company could go bankrupt, and so what good's your pension? And then now you're back to relying on the pension benefit guarantee. So this is completely controlled by the saver, and then you can put this money, or you can make this, depending on how you save, become as taxable or as tax-free as you want.
I've already learned a lot. So I guess I really shouldn't just wait for Social Security and live on that. Especially if I want to golf until I'm 80.
Well, I think Social Security is such an important program. It's going to be around, but it's going to be means tested. So I know your politicians won't use those words, and probably a lot of your viewers may not even know what means testing is, but we're already means testing Medicare premiums. Depending on your income, you pay a higher Medicare premium than everybody else. So it's an easy step to take that same schedule that now applies to Medicare premiums and apply it to Social Security benefits. If you have so much other income, your benefits are going to cut back or be completely eliminated. And so then it becomes a program that is there to do what originally was intended, which was to address poverty in senior citizens, not become a retirement program for the masses.
So every year now, when I get the letter that tells me how much I'm going to be worth in Social Security at retirement, it might not even be the case.
I would count on it until it's changed.
Until it's
changed. And I would concentrate on building this new three-legged
Okay.
stool, following the strategies in this book, because means testing is based on taxable income. That's what Medicare premiums are. And if it follows the same path, as I think that it will, this book will help you keep your Social Security and not have it means tested away.
It's funny, you're advocating the same thing Ross Perot advocated in, 1992, wasn't it? 1992. When he ran for president, the means testing of Social Security.
Well, I'm not advocating for it.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that it's going to happen.
Speaking of it.
Because there's many ways to fix Social Security, and I've read just about every one of them, but which ones are going to get passed, which ones are going to be the more politically viable ones. And while I totally disagree with means testing, because that was not the way it's been presented as it's your money.
Right.
Well, it's not my money if you can take it away from me. So it really was your money.
Well, in a minute or so, could you tell us what are the ways that individuals can try to maximize their Social Security payment as they prepare for retirement?
Well, Social Security payments, I think maximizing those are based on a couple of things. One being your age at which you retire, and this comes down to your health. So the healthier you are, if you're going to live longer, then it benefits you to wait as long as possible to start drawing Social Security, and the maximum age is age 70. The other thing that's important, especially for people who may have left the workforce at some point and then return to it, is that Social Security takes your highest 35 years of earnings and averages those. And so if you only have 30 years of earnings, you've got 50 years in there, and you want to try to replace those. So for somebody who doesn't have a complete 35 years, replacing those zeros makes a big difference.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
Looking forward to reading the book.
We should have read this book some time ago. Are we out of time?
I think we have to make sure everybody gets this book.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Rick, we want to thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me back.
Let's ask one last question. Where can we get this book?
This book is easiest place to find it is on Amazon. Don't
Okay.
retire broke.
Okay.
Or it has its own website that you can go to. It's RodgersSpeaks.com, and it's Rodgers with a D, Rodgers.
Okay, great.
Rick, I'll be spending evenings
Yes.
with you for a while.
Okay.
Thanks very much
Thank
for
you.
being with us.
You're welcome.
Tune in again next week for a new edition of Behind the Headlines. We'll see you then.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. The Pennsylvania Chamber serves as the frontline advocate for business on Pennsylvania's Capitol Hill by influencing the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches of state government. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.